One winter night in Juneau, a former Navy SEAL rushes his young neighbor to safety after she stumbles through the snow covered in bruises. His service dog detects danger before he does, and when doctors finally examine the little girl, the truth sends shock through the entire room. Before we dive into this story, share this video with someone who needs a reminder of courage. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of hope, kindness, and second chances. Enjoy the story. The bark beneath the winter sky, winter pressed over Juneau, Alaska, in a heavy white silence. Ethan Ward stepped out of his small timber cabin, the cold biting at his beard, and the familiar stiffness tugging at his left knee. A former Navy SEAL in his early 40s, he carried himself with the quiet resolve of a man who had endured too much, yet still chose gentleness where he could. His tall frame filled the doorway, the navy winter coat hanging broad across his shoulders, the red and black flannel beneath, warmed by habit more than comfort. Strands of silver threaded through his dark hair, and the beard along his jaw, giving him the look of someone older than his years, someone who had been tempered by conflict rather than time. Ranger stepped out behind him, paws landing softly on the crusted snow. The German Shepherd was 5 years old, powerful and brilliant, with black and tan fur that ruffled slightly in the wind. His amber eyes were alert, always studying, always choosing silence unless a warning was needed. The black service harness on his chest bore white letters: Service Dog, Do Not Pet. To strangers, he looked like a sentinel. To Ethan, he was the last piece of the battlefield he didn't regret bringing home. Ethan closed the firewood shed, exhaling a cloud of breath into the frosty air. It had been a quiet afternoon, the kind that allowed thoughts he didn't always want. Flashes of desert heat, echoes of shouting, the rattling ring of a helicopter door. He pushed them away like he always did. Ranger sensed the shift, stepping closer, brushing Ethan's leg with reassuring weight. Then Ranger froze. His ears pricked forward, his gaze locked toward the neighboring house. A low, focused bark rolled from his chest. Ethan followed the line of his attention. A small figure had appeared on the icy walkway beside the house next door. Lily Harper, the 8-year-old girl who lived with her mother, Amanda, in the faded blue cottage. Lily was usually a bright child, thin, short, with warm brown hair that curled just above her collar and a smile big enough to make strangers soften even in grocery store aisles. But today she was not smiling. Today she could barely walk. Her steps faltered, each movement stiff and guarded. The oversized purple coat she wore seemed to drag her sideways, her boots scuffing the ice as if her legs couldn't quite hold her steady. Her cheeks, usually flushed from the cold, were pale. Her lips trembled. Ethan's breath stilled. He had seen wounded soldiers move like that. Ranger let out another soft bark, not loud, not panicked, simply firm, a call for Ethan to look closer. Ethan started forward, boots crunching through the snow. "Lily," he called gently, lifting a hand in greeting, mindful not to startle her. The girl flinched anyway. When the wind swept past, the hem of her coat lifted just enough for Ethan to see it. A deep bruise blotched across her side, dark against her pale skin. Something tightened behind Ethan's ribs. He slowed his pace, lowering himself slightly to make his tall frame less imposing. "Hey there," he said, voice even, warm, practiced from years of calming young recruits and frightened civilians. "You all right?" Lily didn't answer at first. She stared down at her boots, small hands twisting together. Her breath came in quick, frightened puffs. Ethan recognized the posture instantly. The instinct to stay silent, the fear of saying the wrong thing. Ranger stepped forward one careful pace. He lowered his head, tail still, ears softening as if to say, "You're safe here." Lily's eyes flicked toward him. Something in her shoulders loosened, just barely. Ethan continued, "Do you mind if I help you? Looks like that fall on the ice might have hurt." It was an excuse, a safe one, a door she could choose to open if she wished. Lily swallowed. Her voice when it came was thin, used too little and too carefully. It wasn't the ice." The wind lifted a stray strand of hair across her cheek. Her gaze drifted to Ranger again, almost as if asking him permission before she raised her head to Ethan. The bruise wasn't the only thing he saw now. There was fear, real fear, hiding in the way her chin trembled. "Lily," Ethan said softly, "did someone do this to you?" Her hands tightened until her knuckles paled. Ranger sat beside her, tall enough that his shoulder met her arm. Lily's fingers brushed his fur, tentative at first, then staying there as though she needed the contact to hold herself steady. Ethan knelt slowly so he was eye level with her. The cold seeped into his knee, sending a familiar sting up through old scar tissue, but he barely noticed. All he saw was a little girl standing in the snow with a bruise no child should have. Lily's breath hitched. Her voice broke into a whisper. Can you help me?" Ranger barked once, soft, urgent, a sound that felt almost human. Ethan's heart gave a single heavy beat. He didn't know the full story. He didn't know the danger, but he knew the look in her eyes. The same look he had seen in young soldiers cornered by fear they thought they had to endure alone. Ethan nodded slowly. Whatever Lily Harper was facing, he had the sinking sense that stepping forward now meant stepping into a darkness he hadn't prepared for. Yet, he also knew one thing with absolute clarity: he couldn't walk away. Secrets beneath the frozen basement, snow tapped at the kitchen window like restless fingers, soft but persistent. The warmth inside Ethan Ward's cabin did little to quiet the storm brewing within him. He sat across from Lily Harper at the small wooden table, the yellow glow of the hanging lamp casting gentle light across her frightened face. Ranger lay beside her chair, his powerful frame stretched protectively along the floorboards. Amber eyes fixed toward the front door, as if danger stood just beyond it. Lily's shoulders stayed curled inward, the way someone folds themselves when trying to disappear. She gripped the mug of warm cocoa Ethan had made for her, her small fingers trembling against the ceramic. Under the light, Ethan could now see faint bruising along her wrist, half hidden beneath the sleeve of her purple coat. "Lily," he said quietly, leaning forward, elbows resting on his knees. "You're safe here. You can tell me what happened." The girl hesitated. She glanced at Ranger, who lifted his head and nudged her leg gently with his nose. Something softened in her expression. She drew a small breath, shaky but determined. It's Mark," she whispered. Ethan felt his jaw tense. He had seen Mark Dalton only a handful of times, usually in the driveway, a tall man in his late 30s with a rigid, almost military bearing. His short-cropped blonde hair, trimmed beard, and sharp cheekbones made him look like someone accustomed to command. Yet, his eyes held something that always unsettled Ethan, a coldness, as if every expression was calculated rather than felt. Ethan had met men like him overseas, men who confused control with strength. Lily pulled her knees up onto the chair now, curling tighter. "He says I need to be strong," she murmured. "Strong like soldiers. Strong like him. So he trains me." Ethan kept his voice steady. "What kind of training?" Her gaze wandered toward the floor. "He takes me to the basement. It's cold down there. Really cold. He says it's good for learning not to quit." She rubbed her palms together as if feeling the basement's chill even now. "He makes me carry boxes, heavy ones, up and down the stairs, again and again. If I stop, he adds more time. And if I cry," her lips trembled. "If I cry, he calls me weak." Ranger let out a low rumble, not aggressive, but deeply displeased. His ears stood alert, and he shifted closer to Lily as if shielding her from the memory alone. Ethan inhaled slowly, fighting the heat that rose in his chest. He'd spent years in war zones, had learned to steady his heartbeat in the worst conditions, but nothing, absolutely nothing, stirred his anger like the thought of a child harmed by the person meant to protect her. "Does your mother know?" he asked. Lily shook her head quickly. "Mom works nights at the hospital. She's always tired. Mark tells her I'm doing great, that I'm learning. Discipline." Lily blinked hard. "He says she shouldn't worry." Ethan's hand curled into a fist on his thigh. Amanda Harper, Lily's mother, was a woman he had seen from afar a few times. She was in her mid-30s, petite with sandy brown hair that she always wore in a loose bun, soft features touched by exhaustion, and a polite smile for the neighbors. She carried the quiet weariness of someone stretched thin by long shifts and single parenthood. Ethan had never spoken more than a few words to her, but he knew sincerity when he saw it. Amanda was kind, but kindness meant little if she never learned the truth. Lily's voice dropped to a whisper. "I didn't want to tell her. Mark says it would make her upset. He says she needs him. And I shouldn't cause trouble." She swallowed, then added in a smaller voice, Sometimes he says Mom won't want me around if I keep being weak." Ethan felt something in his chest twist painfully. He had been trained to mobilize under pressure, to assess threats, to make decisive moves. But the sight of a trembling child trying to justify her own suffering left him momentarily still. "You are not weak," Ethan said. his voice low but firm. "Do you hear me? What he's doing is wrong. It has nothing to do with strength." Tears brimmed in Lily's eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Instead, she pressed her face into Ranger's shoulder. The shepherd shifted, leaning his solid weight into her, as if offering a shield. Ethan rose and moved to the counter, needing a moment to contain the storm inside him. He gripped the edge of the counter until his knuckles whitened. The cabin felt too small, the air too tight. Old memories flickered, recruits breaking under training they weren't ready for, commanders who pushed too far, missions where he had arrived too late. He would not be too late this time. When he returned to the table, Lily looked up at him with trembling hope. Am I in trouble for telling you?" she asked. "No," Ethan said immediately, kneeling beside her chair. "You did the right thing, the brave thing." Lily blinked, startled. "Brave?" He nodded. "Real strength isn't about carrying heavy boxes or staying quiet. It's telling the truth when it scares you. That's bravery." A single tear slipped down Lily's cheek. Ranger licked it away before she could wipe it herself. Ethan placed a steady hand on the table. "Lily," he said gently, "I'm going to help you. I promise." Outside, the wind howled against the cabin walls, snow swirling in thick curtains across the darkening sky. It felt as though the winter itself was listening. Lily exhaled shakily, a sound not of relief, but of a burden shared at last. The secrets hidden beneath the frozen basement had been spoken, and now Ethan knew what he had to do. Ranger senses the rising threat. The storm had thickened over Juneau by the second night, swallowing the town in sheets of white that blurred houses into vague silhouettes. Wind whipped at the sides of Ethan Ward's cabin, rattling the shutters and pressing icy drafts beneath the door. Inside, however, a heavy quiet filled the rooms, the kind that settles when fear is no longer hidden but has not yet been resolved. Lily Harper slept fitfully on the couch, wrapped in one of Ethan's wool blankets. Ranger lay near her feet, alert despite his stillness, his chest rising and falling in a slow, deliberate rhythm that disguised the tension coiling beneath his fur. Ethan paced near the kitchen doorway, unable to rest. Lily's story replayed in his mind in fragments. Boxes, stairs, the cold basement, the insistence that tears meant weakness. Every piece only sharpened his certainty. This was abuse, methodical and escalating. The clock had barely touched midnight when Ranger lifted his head. His ears snapped upright, his muscles tightening all at once. A low growl formed in his throat, not loud, but sharp and urgent. Ethan froze. Ranger moved to the front window, nails clicking softly across the floor, and pressed his nose to the glass. Outside, the storm roared, flinging snow in swirling spirals across the yard. Yet Ranger wasn't reacting to the wind. His stance was too deliberate, too focused. "What is it, boy?" Ethan whispered. Ranger didn't look away. Instead, he growled again, deeper this time, and Ethan caught a faint sound beneath the storm, a clatter of metal, followed by a stifled cry. Ethan's pulse kicked. He strode to the coat rack, grabbed his navy jacket, and threw the door open. The cold hit him like a wall, slicing into his skin, even through the thick fabric. Ranger bolted out first, bounding through the snow toward the Harper house. Ethan followed, his boots crunching through the drifts. He found Lily in the backyard, collapsed beside a half-buried wooden bench. Her small frame shivered uncontrollably, and her fingers were clasped around her ribs as if holding herself together. Her coat was the same thin purple one she'd worn earlier, now damp with melting snow. Her breath came in shallow puffs, visible in the frigid air. "Lily!" Ethan dropped to his knees beside her. She lifted her head, eyes glassy with fear. I tried to finish the time he gave me," she whispered, voice hoarse. He said cold makes you stronger." Ethan swallowed the surge of anger rising inside him. He wrapped his coat around her, pulling her close to his chest where his own body heat could start to warm her. Ranger stood guard behind them, posture rigid, gaze fixed on the house as though expecting someone to emerge at any moment. "We're going inside," Ethan said, his voice low but unwavering. "Right now." He lifted Lily easily, her freezing hands clutching a handful of his coat. Her head rested against his shoulder, and Ethan felt the tremor of her sobs against his chest. The snow pelted his face as he stood, but he barely noticed. His focus narrowed to the fragile weight in his arms and the unspoken plea in her shaking breath. Ranger stayed pressed against Ethan's leg all the way back to the cabin, guiding, watching, guarding. Once inside, Ethan set Lily down on the couch again and brought blankets, warm water, and the portable heater he normally reserved for power outages. Her lips were still tinged blue, her small body curled inward as though trying to shield itself from memories that hurt more than the cold. Ranger lay against the couch, his head resting on the cushion near Lily's shoulder. She reached out, fingers trembling, and touched his fur. Ranger remained perfectly still, but his eyes softened. "Ethan," Lily murmured, barely audible. "I didn't want to go back down there, but he said if I didn't finish, he'd make the next one longer." Ethan knelt beside her. "Lily," he asked carefully, "was your mother home when this happened?" She shook her head. "She's working the night shift again." Ethan exhaled slowly. He knew what that meant. The house had been left in the control of Mark Dalton, a man whose idea of strength had spiraled into something dangerous. He also knew they wouldn't have much time before Mark realized Lily was missing. A knock suddenly pounded on the cabin door. 3 heavy strikes, forceful enough to echo through the room. Ranger's head snapped up. A warning growl rumbled through his chest. Ethan quietly motioned Lily toward the hallway. "Stay behind, Ranger," he whispered. "Don't move until I say." She obeyed instantly, eyes wide, slipping behind the shepherd's protective stance. Ethan approached the door and cracked it open just enough to see the figure standing outside. Mark Dalton. Snow clung to his blonde hair and to the collar of his dark winter jacket. His posture was stiff, jaw clenched tight. The porch light highlighted the sharp angles of his face, the thin scar that ran along his chin. An old injury he had once mentioned came from teaching a lesson to someone who didn't listen. His pale blue eyes burned with impatience. "Where's Lily?" Mark's voice cut through the cold. Ethan didn't answer immediately. He stepped outside, closing the gap of the door behind him. "She's safe. That wasn't the question," Mark snapped. Ethan's stance shifted subtly, calm, steady, ready. Ranger pressed his nose to the crack beneath the door, growling low. Mark's gaze flicked downward. "You don't get to interfere," he hissed. "She is my responsibility." "That's not what it looks like," Ethan replied. Mark's nostrils flared, fury rising like steam off his breath. "Mind your own business, Ward. This is family." Ethan leaned in just slightly. "I'll mind it," he said evenly. "When Lily stops showing up bruised and freezing in my backyard." Mark's expression darkened. The storm roared around them, wind screaming across the rooftops. But the tension between the two men cut sharper than the cold. Ethan didn't move. Mark didn't back down. But only one of them had Ranger growling behind the door, ready to defend the girl they both knew was in danger. Mark finally spit out, "This isn't over," before turning sharply and disappearing into the storm. Ethan shut the door, locking it, bolting it, checking it twice. When he returned to the living room, Lily stood with Ranger, her small hand buried in his fur. And Ethan understood, with a clarity that steadied his breath. Whatever Mark tried next, the storm would not be the only force standing against him. He would not reach Lily again. The blizzard and the breaking point, the storm reached its full fury by the following night. Snow hammered the rooftops in relentless waves, and wind screamed through the narrow gaps between cabins, as though the mountains themselves were warning anyone foolish enough to step outside. Inside Ethan Ward's home, however, the chaos of the weather paled beside the weight of the decision he knew he had to make. Lily Harper sat curled beneath a heavy blanket on the couch, her face still pale, but her breathing steadier now. Ranger stayed beside her, his massive head perched on the cushion, his ears twitching with every creak of the cabin. The shepherd had barely taken his eyes off the door since Mark Dalton's visit. Ethan could read the tension in every line of the dog's body. Ethan stood near the kitchen table with his phone in hand. Snow rattled against the window behind him. His thumb hovered over the screen only a moment before he tapped a familiar name, Thomas Hale. Thomas arrived in Juneau the same year Ethan did after their final deployment. Now in his early 40s, Thomas carried the calm authority of a man who had spent years balancing discipline with compassion. He was tall but lanky, with ash-brown hair that had begun to thin at the temples, and a trimmed beard that softened the sharp angles of his narrow jaw. His gray eyes were perceptive, steady, eyes of someone who had seen enough pain to recognize it instantly, and enough loss to take every report seriously. When Thomas answered, his voice carried the low, focused tone he reserved for emergencies. "What's happening, Ethan?" "Lily," Ethan said, glancing toward the child. "She's hurt, and she won't be safe if she goes home tonight." In the brief silence that followed, Ethan could hear Thomas shifting, likely grabbing his coat and keys. "I'm coming," Thomas replied. "Don't let her out of your sight." Ethan didn't plan to. He hung up and moved back into the living room. Lily looked up at him with wide, fearful eyes, her fingers curled into Ranger's fur for comfort. "Is he coming back?" she whispered. Ethan's voice softened. "Not if I can help it." But even as he said it, Ranger's head snapped toward the door. His lips lifted in a warning growl. Then came the pounding, heavy, furious blows against the wood. Snow-laden wind rushed in through the seams as the entire frame shuddered under the force. Ethan stepped forward immediately. "Lily, stay behind Ranger." She obeyed without question. He cracked the door just enough to see Mark Dalton looming on the porch. Snow clung to his eyelashes and hair, and the bitter cold had reddened his cheeks. Rage sharpened every angle of his face. His breath fogged the air in harsh bursts. "Where is she?" Mark demanded, his voice thick with resentment. Ethan stepped outside, blocking the doorway with his body. "She's not going anywhere with you." Mark's expression twisted. His eyes narrowed, pale and cutting. "She disobeyed. She ran. She doesn't get to run." "She's a child," Ethan said, "and children don't owe obedience to fear." Mark tried to shove past him, but Ethan planted his boots firmly in the snow, gripping the edge of the door with one hand while keeping his injured knee braced. Inside, Ranger let out a fierce bark. Deep, thunderous, nothing like the restrained sounds he had made before. It stopped Mark for a split second, but the man's temper was already spilling over. "You think you can take her?" Mark spat. "You think you can tell me how to raise my family?" Ethan leaned forward, dropping his voice to a calm, cutting edge. "I think you forgot what family means." Mark's glare turned venomous. He moved again, attempting to force his way in. This time, Ranger surged to the threshold, body rigid, chest broad as a shield. His bark exploded into the night, echoing off the snow-heavy trees. Mark stumbled back at the sound. Then headlights pierced the swirling storm. A police SUV rolled to a stop at the edge of the driveway, lights rotating red and blue across the snow. Thomas stepped out, wrapped in a thick gray parka, his badge glinting under the harsh beams. Two uniformed officers followed, each bundled against the storm. Mark's expression flickered, a crack in the anger, replaced briefly by fear. Thomas did not shout. He did not rush. He approached with the solemn authority of a man who understood both the law and the weight of the moment. "Mark Dalton," he said, voice steady, "we need to speak with you regarding the safety of your stepdaughter." Mark's jaw clenched. "She lied. She always lies." Thomas exchanged a brief glance with Ethan before responding. "A doctor's report arrived 10 minutes ago. Bruising patterns consistent with physical overexertion and exposure, combined with a child's testimony." He paused. "That's not a lie. That's evidence." One of the officers stepped forward, a woman in her early 30s named Sarah Bennett, with tightly curled auburn hair tucked beneath her hat, a freckled face, and calm green eyes. Sarah was known for her patience with children and her uncompromising stance on abuse cases. She spoke gently but firmly. "Sir, we're going to need you to come with us." Mark's nostrils flared. He took a step back as though preparing to run, but two officers blocked his path. Ranger growled again, the sound vibrating through the wooden porch. Thomas moved closer. "Don't make this harder, Mark." For a moment, a storm raged inside Mark's gaze, as fierce as the blizzard around them. Then, with a sharp exhale of frustration, he surrendered his wrists. The officer secured him without force, guiding him through the snow. As they led Mark to the SUV, Amanda Harper appeared at the edge of the property, having rushed home after receiving a call from the hospital. She was small and exhausted-looking, her sandy brown hair tangled from the wind, her face pale with worry. When she saw Lily inside Ethan's doorway, swaddled in blankets and trembling, something in her broke. She pressed a shaking hand to her mouth, tears spilling freely. "What have I done?" she whispered. Thomas approached her with a soft nod. "You didn't know? Now you will." Amanda moved toward Lily, and Ranger allowed her to pass, only after Ethan nodded. The blizzard roared on, but inside the cabin, something finally cracked open. The truth. And truth, once spoken, could not be buried again. Winter thaw over the ward roof. For the first time in weeks, the wind softened over Juneau. Snow still blanketed the rooftops, but it no longer howled through the trees with the anger of the storm that had marked the night of Mark Dalton's arrest. Instead, flakes drifted lightly, settling in quiet layers on the porch rail of Ethan Ward's cabin. Inside, warmth returned to rooms that had felt tense for too long. Lily Harper no longer clung to every sound outside. Fear still lingered behind her eyes, but it no longer ruled her breathing. Therapy sessions had begun with Dr. Elena Price, a woman in her early 50s, tall and slender, with silver-streaked black hair and a calm, steady voice shaped by 3 decades of working with traumatized children. Her warm brown skin and gentle, observant posture made her presence feel like a blanket pulled over frayed nerves. She encouraged Lily not only to speak, but to draw, to shape her fears into colors she could name, rather than shadows she could not control. Lily now lived temporarily with her mother, Amanda Harper, in a small rental apartment closer to town. Amanda had changed too. The exhaustion still marked her face, dark hair tied back hastily, pale skin recovering from too many sleepless nights. But the empty look that had once filled her eyes had been replaced by resolve. She worked her hospital shifts, but she came home differently now, checking Lily's homework, noting her moods, listening when she whispered her worries. She was learning, painfully, what she had missed. For Ethan, life settled into a new rhythm as well. He repaired Amanda's porch steps, patched the cracked drywall in the hallway, and cleared the icy walkway in the early hours before his coffee had fully cooled. When Amanda tried to thank him, he brushed it off with an embarrassed shrug. Service was something he understood better than gratitude. Ranger adjusted to the new routine instantly. At 5 years old, the German Shepherd carried himself like a seasoned sentinel. His black and tan coat glistened even in dim light, and his amber eyes missed nothing. Whenever Lily came to visit, the dog would position himself strategically beside her chair, often resting his head on her knee as she read aloud from her thin chapter books. If she paused, Ranger would raise an ear, as if urging her to keep going. One morning, with a dusting of fresh snow on the steps, Ethan opened his door to find Lily standing there in a sky-blue parka, boots dusted white, cheeks reddened by the cold. Ranger's tail immediately brushed the floor in slow, content arcs. "Hi, Mr. Ethan," she said shyly. Her voice was steadier these days, her small shoulders less tense beneath her coat. "Morning, kiddo," Ethan replied, pulling the door open wider. "Cold walk?" "It was okay," she said. "Mom walked me halfway, and Ranger, well..." She glanced down. Ranger had already pressed his shoulder against her side like a guardian, returning to duty. Lily reached into her backpack and carefully removed a sheet of thick drawing paper. She held it with both hands, as though it might break if she let it bend even a little. "I made something," she said. "For you." Ethan crouched down, joints complaining. When she placed the drawing in his hands, the world seemed to quiet around them. The picture showed 3 figures beneath a halo of warm yellow light. On the left was Ethan, broad-shouldered, wearing his navy winter coat, bending toward a small child with protective posture. His beard was a little uneven, a detail that made him swallow hard. The second figure was Lily herself, bundled in a coat and scarf, hands reaching toward him, and the third was Ranger, standing between them, chest wide, ears forward, towering like a living shield. Behind them, the porch light glowed bright enough to chase away a darkened silhouette of a basement door. Beneath the drawing, written in uneven but determined strokes, were the words, "Because of you, I'm not scared of the basement shadows anymore." Ethan stared at it, the edges of the paper trembling between his fingers. Something shifted inside him, something he had believed frozen long ago. The cold he carried from war zones, from the memory of teammates lost, from the way silence settled into a man's bones after combat. It all began to melt beneath the fragile courage of a child's handwriting. He cleared his throat, though it did little to steady his voice. "This is incredible, Lily." She smiled, small but proud. "Dr. Price says pictures help tell the truth. And this one feels true." Ranger nudged Ethan's shoulder then, letting out a soft chuff, the sound he reserved for calm assurance. Ethan reached to scratch behind the dog's ears. Outside the window, sun broke through for the first time in days, reflecting off the snow in a shimmer of silver gold. "Winter's almost over," Ethan murmured. Lily nodded. "Dr. Price says winter feels long when you're scared, but it feels shorter when you're safe." Ethan looked down at the child, at Ranger, at the drawing that felt like a balm and a promise. "Then we'll make sure it stays that way," he said. Ranger barked once, quiet, confident, as if sealing the vow himself. And just like that, the last hard frost on Ethan Ward's heart began to thaw under the warm insistence of a little girl's trust. In the quiet light that settles after hardship, we often find something gentle waiting for us. Some call it healing, some call it grace, and many of us know it simply as God's hand moving in ways we may not understand at first. Lily was saved not by strength alone, but by love that refused to look away. A Navy veteran who thought his heart had frozen in the long winters of memory found it thawed by a child's courage. A mother learned that redemption is not out of reach, and a loyal dog stood watch, steady as a living prayer. There are moments in life when help arrives at the very second we fear it never will. Some say it is luck, but those of us who have lived long enough recognize something greater, a quiet miracle, a reminder that God still walks with us through storms, through pain, through the dark places where we think we are alone. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to share it so others may feel its warmth. Leave a comment, tell us where you're watching from, or share a moment in your life when grace found you. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel so these stories of hope, courage, and second chances can continue to reach those who need them most. May God bless you, your home, and the people you love, and may His kindness guide your steps, just as it guided Ethan, Lily, and Ranger toward a brighter day. Amen.